All right, well, y'all, nice to see you. I'm Butler Cain. You can call me Dr. Cain if you like. I'm at the University of North Alabama, and I'm the chair of the Department of Communications. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of our media history today. How was the first session, by the way? Pretty good? Yeah. I know, right? It's like, hey, at least you're doing different stuff today. Still in school, but doing different stuff. I get it. By the way, I need y'all to just kind of be thinking. We've got some interactivity built into this one, so I need a couple of people who feel totally comfortable coming up and reading something here in just a little bit. It's pretty simple to read, but you be thinking about it because I'm going to need a couple of volunteers here in just a minute. And I need somebody who's really okay with a lot of rabble-rousing, all right? So we'll get going. So let me tell you about what we're doing. My background is journalism. That's what I did as a professional for many years before I got into higher education. And so I teach journalism, mass media, all this kind of stuff, but I also teach media history. That's the stuff that I study. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what was kind of going on media-wise in the United States around the time that Alabama was a territory and kind of becoming a state. And so we'll have one little slide here related to Alabama here in just a minute. But these were all the things that were going on at the time. Just really quickly, y'all heard this morning during the session that December 14th is going to be our official Bicentennial. That's the day that we became a state, 1819. I got these couple of maps from the Alabama archives, and this one is one that was from earlier in 1819, where we're still in Alabama territory, and that's our first governor, Bibb, right there. That map is actually from 1823, so a few years after we've achieved statehood. But you'll notice too, we start having the breakdown of the counties in here, right? You know, it doesn't look like Alabama looks like today. Have y'all seen a county map before of Alabama? You'll also notice there's some stuff going on right over here that looks like folks haven't figured this out just yet. But we start working on that a little bit later. So this is sort of where Alabama is at during this time. And during the time frames that I'm going to talk to you, people have been living here. So I want to start with this. I'm going to talk about 3 press eras today, and I tried to make this kind of real short and simple for you all so that maybe you could take away a couple of things and potentially even tell somebody something that you learned later. I'm going to get to this picture in just a few moments. But a couple of things that I want y'all to know. During the Revolutionary War, have y'all studied the Revolutionary period yet? So most of you have, many of you have. So this is during this general time frame, 1765 to 1783. And Alabama is not a state at this time. Alabama's not even a territory at this time, but you're familiar with the original 13 colonies, right? But during this time, people have begun starting to move westward. And so people have begun settling in Alabama, particularly the European settlers. We already had some Native Americans here already. And so I want to talk to you about this idea of free press. We talk about this a lot in the United States, right? This idea of we have the right to free expression, the First Amendment, we can publish our opinions on a lot of things. The First Amendment did not exist during this time, so don't worry about it right now. But this idea of press freedom and freedom of expression did. And here's the basic idea during the Revolutionary War. We are all free to express ourselves the way we want. Sounds great. Until, guess what? Until somebody doesn't like what you're talking about. And so here's the idea. Are you free to express yourself? Yes. Do I agree with you? Yeah, we'll express ourselves all day. Do I agree with you? No. You need to get up out of here. That's the attitude during this time. And so I want to talk to you about the Patriots and the Tories real quick. You're familiar with the Patriots, right? These are the people who decided, hey, Great Britain, you got to get out of here. We don't appreciate what you're doing. You're taxing us without giving us representation. You are putting soldiers in our homes. You've got to go. We don't like you. The Tories, on the other hand, were the people who were pro-British, right? They supported remaining as part of the British Empire. There were a lot of economic incentives that they had there. People grew up as British citizens. They were citizens of the British Empire. It's very difficult to say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else now, right? So these people were locking horns all the time. Now, these people also started newspapers. And newspapers existed during this time. I don't know if any of y'all read a newspaper much. We still have them, but newspapers are having a tough time these days. But back during this time, it was the primary means of people finding out what was going on, other than just going to a restaurant and talking to people or a coffee shop. And so patriots, when they would put their newspapers out, they always promoted this idea of freedom from Britain. That was their big point. We need to do better for ourselves. We can create a new government and a new life. The Tory newspapers always talked about keeping the status quo, right? It's like, hey, we need to stay with Great Britain. That we've got a lot of advantages. Those patriot people are crazy. Don't listen to them. Listen to what we're trying to tell you. During this time, there was not this idea of a newspaper being an impartial, balanced vehicle for information. The newspapers were not trying to give you information and say, hey, you just decide what you believe. We're going to try to give you multiple perspectives. The newspapers existed to give you one perspective, and that depended on who was operating the newspaper. So you had to pick a side. Some threats to press freedom and freedom of expression during this time. We had armies and militias walking around. If you were a newspaper editor and you were a patriot newspaper and the British Army showed up in your town, guess what kind of choices do you think you had? You're going to keep publishing? No, because the British Army is not going to let you, right? So maybe you pack up and leave. But that's very difficult on your family, right? Maybe you can't do that. What would be something else you might be able to do? Switch sides. Oh, British Army's in town. We're a Tory newspaper now. Let's wait till the Brits leave. We'll switch back later. But remember, these people have to make money and feed their families, so it's a very difficult situation for them. Mob violence was a big deal during this time. I want you all to know something, if you get nothing else out of this today, is that Americans, we have always disagreed on stuff. Always. We always disagree. We might have some broad ideas about what we believe value-wise, but we still disagree politically, right? Does anybody notice we tend to still disagree politically? We're in a political season. It's all, right? This was happening way back then as well. However, back during this time, mobs might show up at your house, and it's something along the lines of, hi, yes, we're an angry bunch of people right outside here with torches. Yeah, how are you doing? We didn't like what you published last week, so we're going to burn your house down. Okay, yeah, just come on out. Right? By the way, I'm exaggerating. It did not happen that way. It did happen in the middle of the night. They would drag you out of bed. Maybe they torch your place, or they torch your print shop, or something like that. And both sides did this, Tories and Patriots. So it could be a very dangerous job during this time. So it was one thing, excuse me, to say, do we value free expression? Yeah, but I'm still going to come burn your place up. So, also, I want to tell you about tarring and feathering. Have y'all ever heard of this phenomenon at all? You might even have older, grandparents, somebody say, we're going to tar and feather you or something like that, right? Here's what happened. This is what this picture is showing right here. The idea is not the same kind of tar that we talk about that you put on the streets, that really dark asphalt kind of stuff. It's a similar kind of product, but not like that. Any of y'all ever put your hand up on a pine tree or something like that, and what happens, especially during springtime? All that sticky resin, all that, it's hard to get off your hands, right? Or off your clothes. Imagine kind of coming up with a pine tar solution that if they drag you out, you're the editor, they don't like, they're going to pull you out of bed, they're going to strip your clothes off. Maybe they'll let you keep your undies on. Maybe not. They're going to pour all of this stuff on you. It's hot. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to burn. And then as it is drying and sticky, they're going to get all these feathers. And by the way, the feathers do not come from the Walmart pillow stand. Those feathers are nice. These feathers are coming from the floor of the chicken coop and are covered with chicken poop and mites and bugs. And if y'all ever had the feathers, it's sticky on the end, the pointy quill part. They didn't care. They didn't take any of that stuff off. They just threw it on you. Can you imagine walking around like this for several days? You hurt, you sore, you stink. And how do you scrub that off? Y'all tried to scrub the pine tree stuff off before, right? That's hard. Wears your skin out. So that was one of the punishments that people did. And again, it goes back to, do you have freedom of expression? Yeah, but you need better expression, so we're going to teach you a lesson. That's the idea. Now, I need a couple of volunteers, someone who feels really comfortable coming up. Is there anybody in this room who feels comfortable coming up, talking about a couple of things? Your teacher can even volunteer too, if she would like. One, all right, cool. You want to start with her? And tell me your name again, I didn't even ask.
Kim Munson.
Munson, Miss Munson, fantastic. Would you come up here for just a second? And Miss Munson's going to show us the first time how this goes. Maybe one of y'all might like to come up to the next one. So here's what I'm going to ask Miss Munson to do. Miss Munson, you are the editor of the Royalist Review. Okay. And as you can imagine, if it has royal in the name, who do you think they support?
Royalty.
England, the British crown, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you that just so you look at it real quick. Can I get you all to do this? Can I have y'all stay put? This is the dividing line. So everybody in front of this line, you love the Royalist Review. You subscribe to this newspaper. You are pro-England. Y'all are patriots. You hate the Royalist Review. Okay, you ready for this? Now, The editor of the Royalist Review has written an editorial about all of the shenanigans that are going on these days, and here's what I need you to do. And if you would stop after each little paragraph just to give a little moment.
Okay.
You people who support the Royalist Review, you need to show that support for this editorial. Right? Yes. Now, you people who do not, what do I want to hear from you? What do you do? I want hefty boos on this, okay? All right, so here we go. You go right ahead.
Hefty.
The anarchic forces that have been unleashed in Boston as of late are a threat to the public's safety and security.
Yeah, all right. What? Yeah, no. I'll have the boos, okay.
Yeah. There can be no better security than that which comes as a member of the British Empire.
No, go home.
This so-called patriot talk of revolution is both ill-conceived and ignorant.
Yeah, there you go. Y'all get it. Let's go.
The publisher of this newspaper urges the rabble-rousers to end their rallies and return to their senses.
Oh, no, you go home. All right, thank you. That is the Royalist Review. As you can imagine, though, you patriots have allies as well. We've got the Proud Patriot right here. And the Proud Patriot has also written an editorial. Would one of y'all care to read it? Would one of y'all like to do this? Anyone? I heard somebody's getting volunteered. Someone getting voluntold. Right? Anyone? I can do it. I can do it. Hey, would one of you quarters want to switch sides real quick? Y'all good? Yeah, good. But yeah. Okay. So I will be the Proud Patriot. So I need you patriots to support us, okay? And I need you all. What y'all gonna do? Yeah. Y'all are not down with this hefty booze, right? Okay. Here we go. Citizens of Boston, daily we see more threats to our civil liberties and even our pocketbooks from an increasingly disconnected British government. Now is the time to break free from this tyranny and claim the right to determine our own destiny. Protests will continue throughout the city until the Tory oppressors renounce their ways or leave. The publisher of this newspaper urges freedom-loving Americans to take a stand. Okay, now, here's something else, y'all. There's a third newspaper in town, the Balanced Beacon. The Balanced Beacon thinks that the Patriots and the Tories, all of y'all are messed up. Y'all are you're going crazy. So, what do you think about how all of y'all are going to react to this? Okay, here we go. Here's the Balanced Beacon. It is with a heavy heart that the publisher of this newspaper addresses recent unrest in our city of Boston. Both Tory and Patriot forces seem willing to destroy our security and safety in the name of ideology. Both sides are to blame for recent unrest. Both sides should be able to engage in civil discourse.
My bad.
Sorry. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. You can change your vote. There you go. The Balanced Beacon urges these competing mobs to seek a compromise so that all Bostonians may return to a normal existence. Yeah, all right. So here's the idea. We all hate the Balanced Beacon because the Balanced Beacon is too weak to even pick a side. That's how people would see it during this time, okay? So, hey, give yourselves a round of applause for participating. Now, check this out. I want to move to the party press really quickly. After the Revolutionary War, we've got political parties who are controlling all of the newspapers. And this is a totally normal thing during this time. And what the newspapers existed for, they existed to promote their political party and their candidates. And here are a few things that the party press tried to do. Does any of this sound familiar kind of today? They defended the party and its politicians. They also made sure that they wanted to provide information to the public in the way that they presented this was, we're going to tell you the truth. Now, it might have been their truth. You get what I'm saying? So, also, they wanted to influence its readers. They wanted to influence you and how you might vote. And one of their main jobs was to attack their political opponents. Some of these newspapers only existed long enough to attack a particular candidate and then boom, gone. So they were vicious in the stuff that they would publish. This idea of objectivity, where you're trying to be impartial and fair, as I just said with a balanced beacon, that didn't exist. Partisanship was the norm of the day, and it was a dereliction of duty if you chose not to pick a side. That was not a professional value. Really quickly, have y'all ever heard this term called gerrymander? Gerrymandering? If you haven't quite got to it in political science and maybe history yet, you'll get to it at some point. Here's what it is. We still talk about this today. In fact, the issue was in front of the Supreme Court just earlier this summer. And the idea is this. States have political parties. Today we have Democrats and Republicans, right? Primarily. And whatever party is in power, by the time they come to the next census and they get to kind of tell people, rechange the voting districts and stuff like that. Gerrymandering is when the political party in power changes the voting districts to try to include people that would help them stay in power, and then try to exclude people who they don't want to vote them out of office. So does that make sense, generally speaking? That's called gerrymandering. Well, where did this come from? In 1812, the governor of Massachusetts was a guy named Elbridge Gerry. He was a Republican. At the time, we had two parties, Republicans and Federalists. Those were the two parties at the time. And by the way, that's not the current Republican Party. They went through some changes, different stuff, okay? And the Republican Party up in Massachusetts wanted to make sure that Elbridge Gerry got reelected, and their fellow Republicans get reelected too. They changed some of the voting districts. There was a Federalist newspaper editor named Benjamin Russell who was looking at these new maps and said, you know what? This is awesome. This is so whack. One of these even looks like a salamander. One of these districts looks like a salamander. Soon after, the Boston Weekly Messenger put out this district, and they added a head and some claws and a wing to it. And instead of calling it a salamander, they called it a gerrymander after Elbridge Gerry. And that's where the term gerrymander came from. We still use it more than 200 years later to talk about when people are redrawing lines. So during this time, and this was happening in Alabama at the time too, not to the same extent, but people were using the newspapers to make political statements. During this time, the Mobile Sentinel shows up down along the Gulf Coast of Alabama, what would to become Alabama, showed up in 1811, May the 11th. This is not a copy of the first edition, but it's one of the earlier ones that came from the state archives. And that was down in an area called Fort Stoddard. And they were still, a lot of the news that was in this included things like what was going on the Gulf Coast, trade, even Spanish land interests in Florida still was going on. And you can see by 1811, we weren't quite a state yet. We were a few years away from that, and we weren't even a territory just yet, too. And the second newspaper, there seems to be a little disagreement on this, but generally speaking, it looks like the Madison Gazette that came back the next year, 1812, was the second newspaper in the state. They came about during this political party press era. And so they also helped promote particular candidates in general. Last thing, and I think I've got till what?
35?
Till 10:35? Okay, yeah, we're doing okay. Last little section that I want to tell you about is the penny press. Based on the title of this era, what do you think? How much do you think the newspapers cost? It was a penny. Somebody figured out how to be able to publish newspapers and sell them for a penny and still make a profit at this, right? And so this new penny press era, it totally changed mass media in America. And Alabama newspapers and Alabama media started coming up in this era as well. And so 4 things that I want you to know about that came out of this era. Number 1, instead of the political parties giving them money to survive, they broke away from the political parties and they could start selling advertising. Y'all know advertising because you've grown up with it. You see it everywhere, right? That's how people pay to promote particular points of view or content or any kind of thing like that. That also allowed them to be politically independent. Now, since they're not getting money from the political parties, they can start publishing stuff that they want to publish. They don't have to toe the party line anymore. They also focused on news instead of a lot of opinion. Y'all, those partisan newspapers were so boring. They were all these politicians just yakking on about what they believe, their perspectives were. People didn't dig it. And last thing, they started selling newspapers on the street. Do y'all ever remember seeing those like Newsboy or Newsgirl kind of, hey, extra, read all about it out on the street? That's how they sold these penny presses, because people might be coming by at the end of the day with maybe just a little bit of change in their pocket. And they said, hey, you want today's newspaper? It's just a penny. Hey, I got a penny. Now, not everybody had a penny, but a whole lot more people had a penny than what they used to have to buy newspapers for. Just to give you some perspective, a newspaper subscription up before this time cost approximately 2 to 3 months of your annual salary. So only people with lots of money could afford those things. The rest of us, we could never afford it, so we didn't get the information that we wanted. By the time the penny press came around, we could. And so what this did is big for all of us. It changed. In fact, it still influences the way that y'all have media interactions today. It allowed all of the masses to get affordable information so we could start learning things more now. And so that changed the game here in the United States. All right? So check it. Just that's where some of my other material comes from, that book right there. But that's my contact information if anybody wanted to follow up with an email or any kind of thing like that. But I wanted to stop with just a few minutes just to give you all a chance to ask a few questions or to have a little conversation about something I might have told you up there before that buzzer sounds on us. So who's got a question for me? I'll take anything, even kind of related. You can try to stump me too if you like. You probably will, actually. Give me something. I know, is this, I'm a teacher as well, so I get this, it's all the time, right? I usually tell my classes I'll just stare until it becomes uncomfortable. Yes?
Do you like the Lions at UNA?
You know what? They've had me there. I've been there 3.5 years, and so far it's been a cool place to work. Y'all know we do have live lions on campus. So I work just a couple of minutes walk from our lion habitat. It's really nice, actually. Seriously, it's a really nice facility for those lions. And yeah, it's fun. It's a big tourist destination. And when we have school buses come by, especially for middle school or elementary school kids, they're all hitting up those lions at some point. And then immediately go hit the Chick-fil-A. That's how it goes. What else? I know this kind of lesson is something that really y'all aren't talking about in school. This might be something you might study a little bit later, maybe later on in high school or once you get to university or even if you're studying a trade, something like that. But one of the cool things about media history and things to know about media, and so I'll leave you with this, if you don't have another question too, is that all of y'all are subject to media messages. All of you communicate, and you will communicate every day for the rest of your life. So it's a good idea to understand how it works with some of its history sometimes, because it does affect you in ways you may not even be aware of just yet. Yes?
Do you see a lot of parallels with the current news media and the people in power?
Yeah, in fact, there are folks who are starting to study now about this. They go back to this partisan press era. And we moved away from that, and we got away from it. In fact, so much so that the party press era was deemed sort of like the dark ages of journalism history. But what we see now is that we kind of come back, especially if you look at cable news, where if you want to consider Fox or CNN or MSNBC, that they've taken some pretty obvious tilts toward political perspectives. And so now people are looking at this partisan idea again in a modern context and how it might be working today.
Right.
It's really fascinating stuff. Yeah. And hey, here's another thing, y'all. The First Amendment promises us a free press, right? It doesn't promise us a fair press or even a responsible press. It just promises us a free press. And so how people decide to use that, sometimes they do it really well and sometimes they don't. And but all of it is, except for a few little things here and there, just about all that is protected under the First Amendment.
Thank you.
Yeah, hey, thank y'all for your attention. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I think we've got probably just about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes maybe, before that buzzer's gonna go. Where are y'all going next?
Lunch.
Ooh, I think I'm getting lunch too, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Ms. Munson, what do you teach?
Spanish.
Hey, all right.